Denver Broncos rookie quarterback Bo Nix was working with the starting offense at day 9 of training camp, and he continues to stay red hot. Music to the ears of Denver Broncos fans. But we also want to talk about the running game, maybe causing some complications with your 53-man roster projections. We've got all that and more coming up on today's episode, Locked on Broncos.
You are Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, Broncos Country. We have another positive Bo Nix day to report on as of day 9 at Denver Broncos training camp. Bo Nix running with the starters and looking good out there. And we got some positive news about the running game offensively as well. We're going to break down day 9 of Denver Broncos training camp here on today's episode, Locked on Broncos. But want to say thank you to every single one of you that makes Locked on Broncos your first listen of the day every single day. My name is Sayre Bedinger, co-host here of Locked on Broncos, as well as the site expert of predominantlyorange.com, where I've been covering the Denver Broncos for over 10 years. And co-host Cody Roark is still moving into his new apartment. He should be back tomorrow, but we miss him greatly and we wish him well as he's moving all the heavy stuff here today on Friday. But he was still out there at Broncos practice, and he was still able to get me some information here remotely to be able to report back to you. And it sounds like great news all around. But Broncos Country, I first got to tell you that today's episode of the show is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. And we're on the doorstep of the NFL season, right? This summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. So visit FanDuel.com to get started. And if you haven't already, we appreciate you so much for hitting subscribe for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts, so you can get every episode of Locked on Broncos as soon as it's made available. Bo Nix continued to stay hot at Denver Broncos training camp. This is the great news that everybody's been wanting all offseason. We've been awaiting training camp with bated breath, wanting to find out, first of all, is Bo Nix going to look any good out there? And second of all, when is he going to be named the starter? Well, we don't know the answer to the second question quite yet, but I think we can deduce and determine quite a bit from the way that practice has been going this week. The Denver Broncos started their padded practices on Monday, and so far, out of the days of the week here, they've had 4 padded practices. Bo Nix has been the quarterback one for 3 of them. So if you're keeping score at home right now, Bo Nix was the quarterback one on day 1, on day 3, and now here on day 5 this week, which is technically day 9 of Denver Broncos training camp. It's a little confusing, the numbers, but it'll all work out in the end. Bo Nix has been running with the first team offense quite a bit this week, which may be our best indicator yet that he is in the lead, as some believe, for the starting job. Now, it's still being billed as an open competition. Sean Payton did not say anything definitive after day 9 of practice regarding the quarterback competition by any means, but we may have gotten some definitive, updates on Zach Wilson, not necessarily from Sean Payton at the podium, but both Bo Nix and Jarrett Stidham received reps in a 2-minute opportunity during practice. Zach Wilson did not have the same opportunity. But let's talk about Bo Nix, okay? Because this is the potential franchise quarterback of the Denver Broncos. And what is it that all fans of the team want to be hearing about Bo Nix at this point of training camp? You want to know that he's stacking days, that he's making improvements, that if he makes mistakes, that he's coming back from those mistakes and able to sort of overcome and continue to run and operate the offense. I'm monitoring tweets from people that are out at training camp. Of course, all the great folks that covered the Denver Broncos, including Cody Roark, who is the beat writer over there at Mile High Sports. You know him well on this show. When you see these observations from people that are out at practice talking about Bo Nix making checks at the line of scrimmage, he's operating the offense with a level of confidence that you're not used to seeing, not just from a rookie quarterback, but really how many years has it been in Denver since we've seen an offense out there operating an offense with such command at the line of scrimmage. And we don't want to be hyperbolic, but Bo had a couple of impressive throws on the day, had an impressive session when the Broncos went to 2-minute drill, end of half drill. I saw a throw that he made against Pat Surtain in coverage, and you know the mark of a really good throw is when the best cornerback in football gets up and kind of smacks his hand together in frustration because Bo Nix fit the ball in a really tight window over the middle of the field to Cortland Sutton in tight contested coverage from Pat Surtain. So we're seeing Nix not just operate the offense with confidence, but it shows that he's there's no greater sign of his confidence than when you're attacking Pat Surtain in coverage a little bit there. So you can't be afraid to throw at Surtain's direction, and Bo Nix is not afraid. According to Cody, had another impressive throw to Josh Reynolds on a deep out, and Cody told me he was aggressive, taking shots downfield with the football. This is what you want to see from Nix. And of course, I think this is the biggest difference from what we saw last year with the offense. There weren't a ton of downfield shots, right? I mean, downfield deep, there were shots, but when we constantly were coming to the table after Denver Broncos games, we were seeing a lack of sort of a bread and butter in the intermediate range, right? Between 10 to 15, 20 yards, the Broncos pass game was relatively non-existent. Now it seems like that's where Bo Nix is really starting to thrive. So it's an exciting update, Broncos country, to hear that the quarterback is out there. We talked about this yesterday, but PJ Locke said that Bo is playing post-snap games with the safety position out there, manipulating them with his eyes and doing all sorts of things at the line of scrimmage now, making checks in the running game as well. So Bo is seeing the defense. He's mastering the offense. And you can't help but be encouraged by the fact that he's taken 3 of the 5 days this week with the first team offense with the Broncos in pads. So I think that is substantial. I think there is something to read into there as we approach getting ready for preparing for an opponent, and that'll change the way the Broncos practice as well, right? I mean, right now they're doing a lot of installation, they're doing a lot of things they're practicing situational football and all of those sorts of things. But once you get to this Colts game, they'll start doing a little bit more game planning, and we could see a change in the philosophy of the way that practices are run. Jarrett Stidham sounds like he was the second best quarterback out there for the Denver Broncos. He also got an opportunity in 2-minute drill, made some nice throws, got the offense in position for a field goal. So let's not count Jarrett Stidham out of the mix just yet. I think the Broncos, they definitely like him, and I think they've been high on him for quite some time. So they're not just going to throw in the towel on Jarrett Stidham at this point, but I definitely think there's a little bit more to read into with Bo Nix. And this isn't confirmation bias by any means. When you look at the people that are talking positively about Bo Nix, these are people that are covering the team. These are people that are national media folks that are saying certain things. The Broncos coaching staff, they've been very complimentary. So it's really not just man, you're hoping to see him do well out there, and you're kind of picking and choosing the spots that he's doing well and saying, well, let's attach to those good moments, as opposed to, we're not just ignoring bad moments and riding with the positive ones, right? We're seeing a lot more good than bad from Bo Nix very early on in his first NFL training camp, which I think is indicative of the fact that he has got the goods and he's going to be the starter of this team sooner rather than later. And Broncos country, if Bo Nix is going to succeed and excel at the NFL level, he's going to need a strong running game to back him. The Denver Broncos didn't have that last year. They didn't have a consistent enough running game, but that could turn into one of the biggest strengths on this team in 2024 and could cause some interesting roster shuffling when we get down to final cuts there in September. We're going to talk about all that and more on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. Today's episode of Locked On Broncos is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. And with over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you will always find what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. And with all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. The running game for the Denver Broncos could be one of the team's most underrated strengths as we enter the second week of training camp. But the running game being a strength could also lead to potentially some interesting situations with the 53-man roster when it comes time to cut down to 53 players and ultimately say goodbye to maybe some really good talent on this team. We're going to break down the running game and the position group on today's episode, Locked On Broncos, but want to say thank you to every single one of you, everyday listeners of Locked On Broncos. We appreciate you so much for rocking with us every single day, especially during the offseason where we all want to know what's going on with this Denver Broncos team during training camp and the lead up to the preseason. The excitement seems to be really ramping up. So subscribe if you haven't already so you get the latest news, content, and coverage for your Denver Broncos all off season long. Let's talk about the running game right now, because I think that this is one of those position groups that is going to be the toughest when it comes time to make roster cuts. Cody and I will eventually do our initial 53-man roster projections. And as I kind of plan for that, I'm looking at this running back position and you see the talent all over the place. And I think the preseason is only going to further complicate matters, because even before training camp, even before we've seen these guys out there on the field this year, there really wasn't a clear cut, hey, this is what it's going to look like. And you kind of figure you can maybe figure it out a little bit if you're basing it off of, well, the Broncos are only going to keep 4 total guys, including a fullback, or they're only going to keep 5 total guys, including a fullback. I think that in that case, you might be able to narrow it down pretty good. One thing that seems certain right now, Javonte Williams, Jaleel McLaughlin, and Audric Estime are going to make this team. And I think all play substantial roles in the offense. What does that mean for how the Broncos kind of adjust elsewhere? Who's getting left out in that case? Well, as of right now, let's just talk about the running back position. Jaleel McLaughlin, Javonte Williams, Audric Estime, all 3 of those guys having a really, really good start to training camp. And we'll talk more about Audric Estime later, as he had a down day at day 9 of training camp. Not in a bad way, just in terms of recovering from the knee injury. They're taking it day by day with him. They've got a plan for him, getting him acclimated onto the field. But the other 3 guys that are getting left out here are Tyler Beatty, Samaje Perine, and Blake Watson. I think a lot of people assume that Blake Watson would have a really good chance of maybe unseating somebody and winning a roster spot, but he just came off the non-football injury list. So I asked Cody about that. What's the deal with Blake Watson? What are you seeing from him? It's just too early to make any sort of real determinations. We're going to get to hopefully see Blake Watson quite a bit in the preseason games. And when we do, I expect to see a dynamic player out there who will complicate the 53-man roster discussion. Tyler Beatty has had a quietly strong, I think, start to training camp as well. He's somebody with a lot of speed, obviously scored on his first ever NFL touch with the Denver Broncos as a pass catcher. So you see that ability on display when he's able to get out into space. He can make plays as a runner. He's very, very explosive, very quick, very decisive, and he's somebody who could complicate matters in the preseason as well. But really, I don't know that there's anybody that complicates matters more than Samaje Perine, the veteran, the elder statesman of the running back position for the Denver Broncos. Samaje Perine barely got 50 carries last year. You've heard me mention that on the show before. But what does that mean? Why does that matter? Well, Samaje wasn't really overly involved in the running game last season, which is interesting to me, because when we did see him get carries, he was very good. And he made a lot of the Broncos' best runs last year, I would say. And that kind of tells you both, how good he is and also how much that unit kind of struggled, because we didn't see a ton of him. Again, barely over 50 carries last season. Most of Samaje's work came in those end of half or 2-minute drills where he was out there catching passes from Russell Wilson. So what does this all mean? It could lead to the Denver Broncos kind of rethinking how they prioritize each position group on this 53-man roster, because in a lot of our projections right now, there's no luxury of being able to keep 5 total running backs, including the fullback. And so it's just a matter of what's going to happen injury wise at these other positions. How many off ball linebackers and edge rushers do you keep? And how much does that impact whether or not you can keep and justify keeping that extra running back? How much special teams are you going to get out of guys like Audric Estime and even Samaje Perine if you do end up keeping both of those guys on the team? One thing is certain. 2 guys who play a lot of special teams for the Denver Broncos are Michael Burton and Nate Adkins. Now, Nate Adkins is not necessarily listed as a fullback by the Denver Broncos by any means, but he's somebody that Sean Payton highlighted as being a really good practice player for this team. Somebody who Payton said he consistently grades out in the 90s when it comes to their practice grades. And so that's obviously, he's saying he grades out very highly by this coaching staff. My question is this: could Nate Adkins take Michael Burton's roster spot? I mean, it's not a 1-for-1 in terms of, well, Nate is clearly a fullback as well as Michael Burton. Michael Burton is much more of a traditional fullback and what you've seen in offenses from yesteryear, right? He's a very traditional fullback, plays quality special teams for you. But Nate Adkins also can play special teams for you. And he also can be a blocker when you need him to be. And I just don't know that it's the same. This is the tension here, right? Because you don't know, is it exactly the same blocking wise when Nate Adkins is out there along with, when Michael Burton is out there? It's probably not exactly the same, but could Nate Adkins do what the Broncos ask Michael Burton to do? Probably. So I find this to be one of those interesting roster battles. And Cody and I were kind of talking about it as he was on his way home from practice. Like, is there a chance that those 2 guys could be battling it out for a roster spot ultimately? Because we typically see the Broncos keeping just 3 tight ends on the roster this year. And quite frankly, we haven't really heard much from Lucas Krull in training camp at this point. And so we're going to need to see Krull step up in preseason games, or maybe we could see Nate Adkins take his spot as well if he's not ready for regular season action. So all in all, it's one of those interesting overall situations where you just don't know. The roster gymnastics elsewhere on this team could lead to some very interesting decisions at the running back position where you might have to compromise. Could you, in theory, could you trade somebody like Samaje Perine? Absolutely. I think there's enough teams out there with a lack of talent and depth at running back that you probably could justify trading him somewhere. If you get value back in return, that allows you to say, all right, Javonte, Jaleel, and Estime, those guys are making the roster. And then we're going to have both Blake Watson and Tyler Beatty hopefully on our practice squad, or we're at least going to hope to sneak one onto the practice squad. And I know a lot of you listeners out there, you want to see the Broncos find a way to keep Watson on the 53. I say, let's see him do what he can do in the preseason first, and then determine whether or not he's going to be 53-man worthy, because he's going to have to not only play an effective role as a running back, but on special teams. And Tyler Beatty has a little bit of an edge there as well, because he's played some special teams. So Broncos Country, let us know what your thoughts are on the running back position. Who do you think should make this team ultimately? Should they keep 5 total running backs, including the fullback, or should they keep just 4 and allocate those roster spots elsewhere? Let us know about that. We're going to talk more about this Denver Broncos roster after day 9 of training camp practice. What other players stood out? Who was on the field? Who wasn't on the field? And why weren't they on the field? I'm going to tell you why maybe Nick Bonito missing practices lately is a little bit of a concern for me going forward. We're going to break that down on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. Today's episode of Locked On Broncos is brought to you by FanDuel. I love sports, and I know you do too. We love sports so much, we never want them to stop. But thankfully, you know what's about to stop? The NFL offseason, right? The Hall of Fame game already been played. Broncos preseason football on the near horizon. And even though there's fewer games right now, they're starting to ramp up. But in the offseason, sports don't sports like you want them to, which is when FanDuel lets you keep the sports going whenever you want. All you got to do is open up the FanDuel app and dream up bets anytime you're in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. I was just checking out some Denver Broncos futures props and a bet that you might want to take a look at here. There's a couple of interesting ones, but the Broncos are plus 650 right now to have the worst regular season record of any team in the 2024 season. So maybe a chance to make a little bit of money on the Denver Broncos' success here. What you want to do, you want to head over to fanduel.com and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. Nick Bonitto has missed a couple of practices for the Denver Broncos with a back issue. Is it something to worry about long term? We're going to discuss that and more on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. But once again, want to say thank you to all of you that make Locked On Broncos your first listen. And if you listen to the show Mondays and Wednesdays or just a couple of times a week, ramp that up to every day. Get us in your algorithm on YouTube and listen to the podcast every day. We appreciate you for doing so. Hit subscribe if you haven't already. We really appreciate that. And it certainly helps get the show out there in front of other members of Broncos Country. One thing that I want to talk about on today's episode is Nick Bonitto, the outside linebacker who had a breakout year for the Denver Broncos in 2023. Certainly a talented pass rusher, certainly somebody that this defense is banking on to play a big role here in 2024, although it does seem like Jonathan Cooper and Baron Browning are going to be the top two guys off the edge. Nick Bonitto has been working through a back issue at training camp. Now, he's been kind of on again, off again in terms of the field work and doing some work on the side field or kind of just sitting out of practice entirely. The question that I have, is it concerning at this point? I think we're too early for it to be overly concerning, and I like that the Broncos are being cautious by not just, okay, well, he's all right, he's doing well enough to be out there. I'd rather see the team be cautious early on in training camp, right? And it's not like with Nick Bonitto missing out on snaps, it would be way different last year, right? It would be way different if we were talking about last offseason where, man, he really needed every single snap. He needed every rep in training camp and in the preseason to prove that he could play a regular season role for this team. He's now proven that. He's proven that he can do that. He is going to be part of this pass rush rotation. So to me, the situation with Nick Bonitto is you need to make sure that he is 100% ready and healthy for the beginning of the season. There's been no word as far as a timetable, like with safety Brandon Jones, for instance. Sean Payton kind of gave a 2-week time estimate there. There's not been anything like that with Nick Bonitto. And so you kind of get the impression that this is more of a minor issue than anything else. We'll monitor him on Saturday and certainly give an update on him at Saturday's practice for the Denver Broncos there. But it's something that I'm definitely keeping note of. When you see any player's name pop up this many times in a row in terms of being on the injury report or somebody who's working on the side field or not able to be out there for team drills and things like that, it's worth noting. It's worth filing away at this point, but it's given way for players like Jonah Ellis, the rookie 3rd-round pick out of Utah, to go out there and get some extra work off the edge. Dondre Tillman has gotten additional work. Obviously, Darrell Nchami is out there. Jalen Allen, the undrafted rookie free agent as well. So, but also Thomas Incoom is another player who's been taking advantage. Thomas Incoom was one of the Broncos' priority undrafted free agent rookies last offseason. He made the roster. He made an impact on special teams a little bit more than defensively, but he was out there and he's somebody that, according to Cody and what Cody's been telling me, he could end up being a factor off the edge. So again, as we're talking about these early 53-man roster projections, maybe don't count out Thomas Incoom. And I know Sean Payton said a couple of days ago that he's one of those players who's still in the developmental stage of his game. We're going to see just how developed he is after, for his second NFL season now. I think Thomas Incoom is going to get a lot of work in the preseason off the edge for the Denver Broncos. So as you kind of look at that position, do the Broncos keep 4 or 5 guys? I tend to lean towards keeping at least 5 guys at that position because you need consistency off the edge throughout the NFL season. You need to bring pass rush in waves. Don't forget about Ronnie Perkins as well. We haven't heard his name a ton in the preseason, but this edge group for the Denver Broncos has some intriguing guys at the back end that could end up making this team as the 5th guy. And I think probably the 5th and final guy off the edge. Now, Just some other housekeeping notes. No Justin Sternad, the linebacker and special teams ace for the Broncos. No defensive lineman Zach Allen at practice on Friday. Sean Payton said both of those guys should be back for Saturday's practice. And as I mentioned earlier, running back Audric Estime, the rookie 5th-round pick out of Notre Dame, he had a scheduled down day, according to head coach Sean Payton, which is just a standard for what they're scheduling for him after he had the knee scope earlier this offseason to fix an issue that was going on during right before OTAs. And so Estime should be fine. We should see him back out there very soon. And once again, Sean Payton made a note about Nate Adkins and his ability on special teams as well as offensively. I think if you're looking for a sleeper to pay attention to over the course of the preseason, we need to pay close attention to how the Broncos involve Nate Adkins as a pass catching option. And why is that? I think it's because right now they know what he can do as a blocker. They know what he can do on special teams. So if you see them start to kind of consistently, deliberately involve Nate Adkins in the passing game in the preseason, and that might mean the coaching staff is a little bit higher on him than we think. And so a lot of these guys that we're talking about potentially making the roster, we talked about this when Quinn Bailey went down with an injury. Sean Payton said that, he was going to be their 6th offensive lineman. He was going to be contributing in the jumbo sets. Cody and I have talked on this show as in, maybe Quinn Bailey's roster spot could be up for grabs. Maybe they just had him out there last year in terms of, he's one of the longest tenured guys on the offensive line. And certainly as somebody who's developed, we feel like we can rely on him in this role, but not necessarily viewing him as somebody you can't upgrade over, right? Well, when he went down with injury, Sean Payton revealed that basically the guy was making the team. And so I think that would have come as a surprise to a lot of people that Quinn Bailey was kind of earmarked as a guaranteed player on this roster. Is Nate Adkins another one of those guys? Because he made the team last year as an undrafted rookie free agent. And I personally have kind of written him off a little bit this offseason. I'm saying the tight end position is Adam Troutman, Greg Dulcich, and Lucas Krull, and you can only keep 3 guys there. Well, what if the Broncos keep 4 guys at tight end? And where do they make sacrifices elsewhere? Is Nate Adkins that valuable on special teams to be able to give the Broncos something there where they can't live without? That's what I'm wondering at this point. And I wonder, what are you thinking about this situation? Do you think the Broncos will keep Nate Adkins on the team? This whole training camp, Sean Payton has made mention multiple times. Training camp is about getting to the right 53 players. You need to have the right 53 players. And he said after Friday's practice that he told his coaches on Friday, we want to be getting on their whats all day long today and kind of be the rock in the shoe for them today, because they're not only looking for the guys that are physically the most ready, they're looking for the guys that are mentally the most ready. A note that I have just that I took down as I was kind of observing everybody's, notes that they were tweeting out and things that Sean Payton was saying and videos that have been popping up. You know what I find really interesting about this particular Denver Broncos training camp? This is a very young team. It's one of the youngest teams that the Broncos have had in a long time. And you've got a rookie quarterback out there for the majority of the days this week, taking first team reps with your offense. I find it very interesting that we haven't heard really anything all training camp about the Denver Broncos looking sloppy. We haven't heard really anything about them not being disciplined, committing a bunch of penalties. We haven't heard anything like that from the people that are covering practice. And I haven't seen a lot of tweets out there about, oh, so-and-so had a false start here. So-and-so had pass interference here. So-and-so had... You don't hear a lot about that kind of stuff, do you, right now at Broncos training camp, which is indicative of great coaching, which is indicative of a team that's bought in to the system that they're running, a team that has players that are mentally, as Sean Payton is looking for, these players are mentally tough. And I think that speaks volumes. So Broncos country, that's just an observation that I had about this practice of something that we're not really hearing about. Obviously, we want to focus on what we are hearing about a lot of times, but there's certain things that aren't happening, like penalties and holding and false starts and the coaches getting on players a bunch and guys screwing up, guys constantly being out of position, and that stuff's just not happening right now, which is indicative to me, especially early in camp, that these guys are very focused and ready to go. So Broncos Country, we're going to be recapping what is expected to be an intense day of practice on Saturday. Cody should be back for that show as well. We're going to talk about the quarterback rotation once again. How did Bo Nix look at day 10? And we're going to talk about any other standouts at Denver Broncos training camp. You can get that and more on the next episode, Locked On Broncos. And hey, for your second listen today, go check out Locked On NFL. We appreciate you, Broncos Country. We'll see you soon.